I was thinking this week about Mother Lynn's sermon from 2 weeks ago. And she was talking about that very famous lesson of Mary and Martha. And she told the story of a priest she knew who said that his mom, that was her least favorite scripture reading. And she'd rip it out of the Bible if she could. And when he said that, the congregation all applauded. And I remember looking at you all, and you all were like, yeah, no, nobody really liked that. But here we are today, presented with a parable told by a very aggravated Jesus, who says in this parable, the only time that God appears to speak in a parable, that God is angry, and that all of us will go to the grave at some point, and none of us really own the things that we think we own. So I think Martha and Mary sound pretty good. This is not a lesson for a sort of a calm midsummer Sunday. It's a very challenging lesson. And the challenge for us is really to let it not be about money, but to have it be about anxiety. How do we process our anxiety? I mean, God knows that we live in very anxious times. The last several years have been extraordinarily an anxious period in most of our life. I mean, just this morning I was driving to work, and NPR had a piece from the CDC saying that they're very, very concerned about the exponential growth of the monkeypox virus when the college campuses open again. And I thought, God, could you turn the anxiety meter down just a little bit? We live in such anxious times. And this parable speaks about not only just anxiety, but about God's demands for us, but also the place where we can sort of heal our anxiety and place our trust in God. All around this parable is Jesus talking about how do you deal with anxiety? Where can you place your trust? As the hymn we'll sing in a little while says, all my hope in God is founded, not in myself. And Jesus talks he's talking to a large crowd of people and his disciples, but it's a very large crowd. And he's saying in both places that yes, anxiety is a real human condition for most people. But don't you know that God values every human being? God values each person so much that God knows the number of hairs on your head. God knows the life of little sparrows. So much more God will know and care about you. So in the midst of anxiety about being a disciple, know that you can trust in God and your hope can be founded in the kingdom. And he's telling people this, and he's teaching about being vulnerable and trusting in God. And some guy comes in and says, well, basically, that's great, but listen, I have a money problem I need solved. Jesus is a little aggravated. This man wants his inheritance fixed. There are lots of laws about, both civil and religious, about how to fix an inheritance. But his need is not in vulnerability, not in placing his hope in God, but getting this money fixed for him so he can secure his own security, his own future. His future will be secured if Jesus can just do this for him. And Jesus says, no. Listen to this story. Your security is not going to be in your inheritance. Your security is going to be in the kingdom. And he tells this story about this man who scripturally is known as the rich fool. The rich fool. And if you listen to the parable, it's kind of all about him. It's just him and his possessions. And he comes up with a plan, which is not a bad one. Actually, it sort of mirrors the plan of Joseph and his brothers in the Old Testament when there's a famine coming. He has a plan to store things away for the bad years. For us, it might not sound like, preparing for retirement. So what's wrong with the story? Well, the man can't think of anything else. The man can't think anything else about my stores, my grain, my barns. I will do this, I will do this, I will do this. He's not in a place of community. He's not in a place of caring for other people. He is not in a place of even understanding that he is not self-sufficient. All of those things come from God. All of them. He's been given enormous gifts, and yet he's just obstinate into buying into the illusion of self-sufficiency for his own future. And for the only time in all the scriptures telling of a parable, God appears and he says, "You fool, you fool. Your life is not your own. It's on loan. And due day is today. So your self-sufficiency that leaves no room for anybody else got you nowhere. Because you will die this very day, like all of us will die someday. We can't help that. We can't plan around that. We can't secure our future on our own. We will all die someday. That's the truth. Your very life is owed this day. It's just a gift from God, and God is calling it back. You fool. How many of us fall into that place of believing in the illusion, the obstinacy of the illusion of our own self-sufficiency, as if we don't owe God anything? I built that. I did that. This is mine. I owe nothing to anybody. What fools we are. I think probably, I'm going to tell you another parable. Probably the richest fool there ever was Tsar Nicholas II. He was immensely rich from his family. Imagine, did you all have fantasies about winning the lottery this last week? Think about all the fantasies you had and put them into the millionth power. They were extraordinarily rich. Even someone as rich as Queen Victoria was in awe of their wealth. Absolute power. Absolute endless wealth. But he had the worst anxiety of anyone because he thought he was a fraud. He didn't believe that he could do the job, and he couldn't. He didn't believe he was the right person for the job, but there was no choice. And he was stuck in this anxiety. And the anxiety blinded him. He could never see the writing on the wall. It could be a 4-story Jumbotron sign. He would miss it. He was so blinded by his anxiety and his grasping to secure his future with his wealth, among other things, but mostly with his wealth. That would buy him security. And as we all know, there comes a revolution. And his family eventually the circumstances are less and less and less and less. But he has a plan. He has secured their future. He has used his wealth to secure their future. And finally, they're in this place in Siberia, and they get called down to the basement, and they're told that they're going to be executed. Them, their children, their retainers, all of them shot. Every person has one person they're going to shoot. And they pull the trigger, and Tsar Nicholas dies immediately. And then all the smoke clears. And his children, who he wanted to secure their future, are wounded but alive. And the guards who were revolutionaries but still superstitious enough about the power of the Tsar totally freak out. And the children that he was trying to save did not have the easier death that he had. They had the most brutal, horrifying death. Do you know why? Because he used his wealth to sew into the corsets of his daughter an endless amount of diamonds. His wealth was supposed to secure them. They were like bulletproof vests. It didn't work. His wealth didn't secure his hope or survival. It only made it worse. Now, that's a very elaborate, extravagant story, but let me give you a more modern one. I know someone who's a friend who's utterly driven in their career, utterly driven. Comes from a sort of poorer background. This person is immensely successful. Their whole life is about being driven for their career, securing their future. So much so that there's no room in this person's life for their spouse. And the spouse said, there's no room for me in our life together. And that person left. And that person's future is empty. You can't secure your own future. Self-sufficiency is an illusion. It is an illusion. And so in this difficult parable, the good news comes outside of it. The good news of God's care, God's commitment, God's willingness to walk alongside you in your difficult times, God's commitment to life, God's commitment to walk alongside you in your death to bring you to life. That is the place where our hope is founded. But so often, even as church people, we have a practical atheism that there's church, but the decisions about my life, the decisions about my future, the plans about where I want to be and where I want to go, that's outside God's purview. And what the scriptures are telling us today is they're not. That all things come of thee, O Lord, and only of thine own have we given thee. Where is your hope found? How do you secure your life when you can't secure it yourself? You look to the good news of God, who has and will and is doing the securing of the future in your life. God does not leave us alone. We can fall into the illusion of our own security, the illusion that we make ourselves. But it is as the scripture, as I read in the beginning of this, is just chasing the wind. All of our hope is founded on God alone.